It was a hot summer day in the small Brazilian town of Pedro Leopoldo. The air was heavy and humid. The afternoon sky was covered in a crimson blanket, and the joyful voices of children echoed through the streets. But inside a house, in a dimly lit room, a little boy seemed completely cut off from the sounds of the outside world. With his thin frame and big eyes, he was leaning over an old notebook in front of him, writing something with trembling hands. His name was Francisco Xavier, but everyone called him Chico Xavier. When he was only 5 years old, when Chico sat alone in his room, he realized that sometimes he heard whispers. At first, he thought they were figments of his imagination. But one night, shortly after his mother's death, he saw her standing in the corner of his room, a woman in a long white dress. Chico shuddered inside, but when she smiled, he felt a strange peace. "Don't worry, Chico," she said, her voice soft and familiar. Chico couldn't open his mouth to say a word. The person standing in front of him was his mother, whom he had lost 6 months earlier. Throughout his childhood, the people around Chico saw him as a different person. Sometimes he would sit in an empty room and pretend he was talking to someone. Sometimes he answered questions people asked him before they asked him. But it was his writing that attracted the most attention. As a young man, Chico began to write incessantly, but his texts contained knowledge and wisdom far beyond himself. One day, when a neighbor approached him and asked, "Do you write these?" Chico answered honestly, "No, I only write what they say." Who were these them? Over the years, Chico Xavier's writings began to spread throughout Brazil. As the number of people who believed he spoke to spirits and received messages from deceased people grew, so did the interest in his town. Some considered him a prophet, while others claimed he was a fraud. But far from all this controversy, Chico devoted himself exclusively to writing. In 1932, at the age of 22, Chico's book Parnaso de Mt. Mulo was published. But the book seemed to come from another world, because the poems in it were written in the style of long-dead Brazilian and Portuguese poets. As the experts examined them, they realized that each poem was exactly in the vocabulary and style of those poets. How was this possible? Chico had never had a great education. To those who saw him, he was no more than an ordinary man, calm, gentle, withdrawn, but with a deep soul. After this incident, people began to appear around Chico wherever he went. Some wanted to hear from their lost relatives. Others came to test him. Once, Chico was approached by a man who had lost his son in a car accident. The man still hadn't come to terms with his son's death. Chico took a deep breath and closed his eyes. After a few moments of silence, he picked up a pen and began to write quickly on the paper. The writing looked as if it had come from the hand of a young man. When the father read it with trembling hands, tears welled up in his eyes, because what was written on the paper was something that only his son could know. As word spread, Chico Xavier became one of the most talked about people in Brazil. When the people who met him witnessed the sincerity and truthfulness of Chico's messages, they believed that he was truly in touch with the spirits. But not everyone supported him. The church saw Chico as a dangerous figure. According to Catholic belief, the souls of the dead could not remain on earth. If Chico was really communicating with someone, it could be a trick of the devil. Some journalists wrote that he was a charlatan and was only fooling people. But Chico was never on the defensive. "I am only an intermediary," he always said. These words are not mine. Over time, the books he wrote reached millions of people. In particular, his book, No Solar Our Home, was a huge hit in Brazil. The book was about life after death. Chico said that the spirit that guided him while writing this book was a doctor named Ender Luz. The book described how Ender Luz woke up in another dimension after death, the knowledge he learned there, and how the spirit world worked. These stories attracted a lot of attention, not only in Brazil, but all over the world. Some people accepted them as fact, while others dismissed them as mere fiction. But Chico Xavier's letters, his information, and his consistency over the years made him one of the greatest spiritualist figures of modern times. The years passed. Chico grew old. Even at the end of his life, he continued to help people. He lived a humble life, never accumulated wealth, and never received royalties from any of his books. In 2002, news broke in Brazil that brought everyone to tears. Chico Xavier had passed away at the age of 92. But there was something strange. One day, many years ago, Chico had told his friends, "The day I die, Brazil will be very happy, because I will die on a day when people are the happiest." And indeed, on the day Chico Xavier died, Brazil won the 2002 FIFA World Cup. As people celebrated the championship in the streets, the news of Chico's death was quietly announced. Even after his death, his writings, messages, and connections with spirits were still debated. Some said he was a fake, others believed he was really a messenger. But one thing was certain: Chico Xavier would remain a name etched in Brazil's spiritual history, both for the spirits he saw and the works he wrote, and perhaps, as he said, death was not the end, but only another beginning.